In fact, my view as an investor is that while the last 20 years are interesting, the next 20 years are going to be even more interesting. The 20 years after that will probably be more interesting as India embarks on this great transformational journey towards becoming a developed economy.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the maiden episode of Two GPs Walk into the Bar. And I promise you, Nitin, right after this episode, we are actually going to walk into a bar and get you a drink.
I can't wait.
So, these episodes are going to be about private markets. Private markets is probably one of the least known asset class in India. Not a lot of people know that the AIFs over the last 10 years have delivered almost about 13.5% annual alpha in terms of the IRR in this market. So the intent behind these set of episodes is to be able to kind of demystify this whole world of private market. Get people to understand the space a little bit better. And in our first episode, we have Nitin joining us over here today, who's been a veteran investor in this space. But before we go and talk about the PEVC space, the whole private markets, and so on and on, Nitin, just to our audience would love to get better. So you grew up in the US, went to the top Ivy League school, undergrad, grad, and then moved to India. So give us a little bit of insights into what drove that shift. What was the early life as a student? We heard that you ran about a 12-hour marathon on the Harvard radio station.
Yes.
So give us a little bit of a peek inside who Nitin is.
No, thank you, Sandeep, and privileged to be here. I was actually born and raised in the U.S. And unlike many NRIs, I chose to return to India and build my personal and professional life here. And I've been living in India for almost 20 years now. And after graduating from business school, I had the opportunity to work at a global private equity firm with operations in India. Joined the team in 2003, moved to India in 2004, and spent almost 15 years. And while I was there, I really was just enamored and excited by the opportunity in India. And that always just kept me here. I mean, through the global financial crisis, the only place where there were things going on was India. And then, as we saw the tech ecosystem in India evolve, that also got me very excited and made me interested in building my career here. Of course, along the way, I got married, have 2 kids, and so India is my home. And I look forward to the next 20 years. In fact, my view as an investor is that while the last 20 years are interesting, the next 20 years are going to be even more interesting. The 20 years after that will probably be more interesting as India embarks on this great transformational journey towards becoming a developed economy.
Fabulous. I couldn't agree with you more. And for those of you joining us today, I'm Sandeep Sinha, co-founder, co-CEO of Oister Global. We are institutional investors who invest in top-tier private equity venture capital funds. Like I was saying earlier, right, the whole purpose behind these episodes is demystify the world of PE, venture capital, and so on and on. So Nitin, a lot of people who are joining us in this episode today, they are entrepreneurs. And you are an interesting mix of an investor and an entrepreneur. You had your career with a top-tier investing firm. And then peak of your career, you just quit, turned into an entrepreneur, started your own fund. So what drove that whole transformation?
That's a great question, Sandeep, and of course I ask myself that all the time when the entrepreneurial journey is tough. No, I spent 14 years with global private equity firm Warburg Pincus, as part of their India team, and during my first 10 years I was a generalist. India is a growth economy. Warburg Pincus is a growth firm. There was enough for us to do across multiple industries, whether it was financial services or consumer or retail or IT. And then as I progressed within my career, I was a partner and raised my hand and started thinking about leading the firm's tech investing practice in India. And that was when the Indian technology story was really just picking up. You saw players like Make My Trip and Just Style and Naukri go public and do well. And the Flipkart, Snapdeals, Oyos, and Olas were all coming into being and raising capital. And while it was a great time to be evaluating those opportunities on behalf of a large private equity firm, I noticed that the capital markets, the private markets for late stage tech was actually getting quite competitive. And the interesting opportunities for me were in companies that were actually looking for growth stage as opposed to late stage capital. So in short, I had an idea. And that idea was that I wanted to pursue an investment strategy that I thought was right for India, but maybe not necessarily right for the firm I was working for. And so I said, well, rather than continue to pursue something that may not be value creating for everybody involved, why not step out of a large firm and then pursue something on my own? And I think that I actually didn't think in the very beginning that being a first-time fund manager would be the same as being an entrepreneur, but let me tell you it is, because you're essentially pitching an idea. You have conviction on an idea. That kind of idea for technology entrepreneur can be a new product or service. For fund manager, it's an investment strategy. And you have to pitch that idea 300 times, 300 different people until you hit your first breakthrough. It can be crazy, it can be daunting, it can be incredibly fulfilling, but it is an entrepreneurial journey nonetheless. I don't think I anticipated that when I became an entrepreneur, but I have tremendous respect for the entrepreneurial journey after having gone through this on my own as a fund manager, and hopefully that allows me to connect with entrepreneurs in a way that I may not have been able to do when I was working at a large private equity.
No, you're so right. I mean, I can relate with a lot of what you just said. In my own journey, right, about 20 years back, I relocated back from the Bay Area to India. A lot of things were just picking up at that time, and in the first 5-7 years, we were investing in companies, taking reasonably large equity stakes, with the hope of being able to add value into their journey. But it was not an easy journey, as you said, right? A lot of people see the world of investments with a lot of glamour and hope, and that you have tons of capital that you're going to go out and deploy, but in reality the whole journey is actually quite different than that. But in your case, Nitin, you joined hands with Sumit, your co-founder. So how did it work? I mean, did you guys come together before and you thought about kind of starting the journey, or you met along the way? How did the whole thing pan out?
Oh, yes. It's I can't be thankful enough, but to have a business partner, and of course a business partner like Sumit, because being an entrepreneur and being a fund manager is actually a lonely thing. And so having that individual that you can bounce ideas off of is incredibly valuable. And it's interesting when you have a partner, and I'd love to hear about yours and Rohit's story as well. We decided that we would create a partnership where we're equal partners, and each of us can do the other's job, which means we get a tremendous amount of leverage. We didn't say, okay, you'll lead X and I'll lead Y. We did say that, okay, if you have to do Y, then you will do it. If I have to do X, I will do it, which means that we get more than 2X, in our view, the outcomes that we need to get this business off the ground. Sumit and I were actually ex-colleagues at Warburg Pincus. We got to know each other very well because it's not like we shared office space together. We were actually doing deals together, scoping out the tech sector for Warburg. And we must have met over 300 companies. We met all the companies that were raising their Series B and Series Cs that were eventually becoming unicorns. And we actually crafted a strategy together while we were at Warburg to identify somewhat smaller but promising growth stage opportunities that were very different from the deals that the rest of our partners were doing. And from that, we came across this idea that this kind of investment strategy would be quite interesting, this growth stage investment strategy, which we mentioned earlier. Sumit ended up leaving Warburg to join Multiples, where he pursued this investment strategy with Renika Ramnath and actually did quite well for them. I mean, they were investors in Dream 11, which was a huge hit for Multiples. When I left Warburg and was interested in pursuing this idea on my own, Sumit was the first person I called. I called him in 2017 when I was about to leave Warburg. He said, I'm having a great time at Multiples. I'm not ready yet. I spoke to him again in 2018. He said, okay, now I'm ready. And then we shook hands in early 2019. He joined me at the end of 2019. That's when we launched Filter Capital. Took me a while, but all good things come to those who wait. And 4 years later, I couldn't have asked for a stronger partnership. And we feel pretty excited about what we're about to do.
Awesome. Actually, Sumit is a great guy. I mean, one of the investments that we made, Hume, is People Strong.
Of course.
We exited to multiples,
Yeah.
and Sumit was the guy who replaced me on the board, so we got to know each other fairly well. They actually made a joke saying one Sinha walks out, the other one comes in.
That's right.
So it was kind of interesting. Actually, you talked about Rohit and I. Our journey actually started off a little different. We knew both each other from our college time together. One fine day when we said that, okay, we are going to launch our venture, still classic story of being an entrepreneur, everybody said, look for your passion, right? With a few glasses of wine down, we said our passion lies in the world of creating a wine business. And that's what we want to do in India. Thankfully, some sanity prevailed, and we realized that we would rather stick to something that we understand well. So we actually went into the whole world of investments. And that's when we launched Lumis in 2006. And we have done different initiatives over a period of time, run multiple ventures, but thankfully, stayed together in terms of building few different things one after the other.
Which eventually culminated in Oister?
Which culminated in Oister. And, we were doing initially large stake investments, figuring out ways where we can be, an extension of the management team to bring together some value. And then about 3.5, 4 years back, we realized the opportunity in terms of investing into funds. And when we started doing that, we realized that, a lot of companies have basically figured out where to go for capital raise. The seed stage, the VC stage, the growth stage, the private equity stage, and so on. And surprisingly enough, a lot of people who know about the fund space would realize that fund capital raising is not as structured, right? And that's where we saw the opportunity and said, okay, this is an area we want to go deep. So a very interesting journey, building out, and India is supposed to have a massive uptake in terms of the alternative investments, and we are hopefully looking at being a significant part of it.
I think it's a sign of the maturity of a market where you can find these pockets of activity or pockets of opportunity where you can build very large businesses, and that in a way just becomes your reason for existing. We thought about that as well when we were pursuing growth stage investing. When we asked ourselves, why should we as an independent platform deserve to exist as Filter Capital? What can we really bring to the table? And what we had identified was that there's a tremendous amount of early stage activity in India. So any startup looking to raise a Series A or a seed round, they know exactly where to go. There are, of course, all the global VC firms who are operating in India, as well as many local Indian VC firms that have launched over the last decade. Similarly, when companies are raising $50 million or more, they know which private equity firms or hedge funds or large pools of institutional capital to go for. But we found out that when companies were raising Series B or Series C rounds, they were hitting some inflection point, too mature for venture, not quite ready for private equity or the public markets. In a way, there was a bit of that bridge financing, crossover financing, crossing the chasm, as it were. The venture investors might say, maybe this is too late for us. PE guys would say, maybe this is too early or too unprofitable. And we said, wow, this is a really interesting opportunity. If you're an entrepreneur, we found these entrepreneurs were meeting everybody. They were meeting family offices. They were meeting VC firms. They were meeting hedge funds because there was no single port of call for them to raise their Series B or Series C round because there were a few focused players in the market. And if you look in markets like the US and China, if you look at TCB, started as a growth stage crossover fund, become massive in China, Hill House. They all started as Series B and Series C outputs, grew over a period of time. In our view, that is the opportunity for Filter Capital as well. We also see a very interesting dynamic where essentially any entrepreneur starting a new business in India in any sector or industry, not just IT services and software, but it could be financial services or consumer, they're going to use tech to compete with the unorganized market or compete with organized incumbents. If you're an entrepreneur today, how do you not use it? In our view, the skill set required to evaluate technology solutions is different from the skill set required to evaluate traditional businesses. And therefore, for technology businesses raising Series B and Series C rounds, they have to go to specialist investors. And our view is this is the future of private equity, because if every entrepreneur is going to be using tech, then investors have to come up the curve very quickly. And that, in our view, is the opportunity for Filter Capital.
It's an amazing way you laid out the differentiating factors for filter. I'm sure some of the audience over here who quickly understand the world of VC and they understand the world of PE. I think it's great to hear the way you lay out the middle path over there, right? So thanks for that. And on that note, I think again referring back to a lot of the entrepreneurs who are with us on the session today, I would love to understand that your whole philosophy is to bring together a portfolio of companies which are true disruptors, right? Who are supposedly going to be the market leaders, right, for tomorrow. How do you do that? How do you size up these opportunities? How do you, because these companies are past the point where your entire dependence is just on the founder, right? Because
That's right.
they've gone through a couple of more stages of development, but they haven't progressed to fully matured state. So there is a mix of the elements both from the PE world and the VC world that you kind of evaluate. So would love to know, your one, how do you build a pipeline for something like this? Because you guys have a proprietary pipeline, which is a significant differentiator. And then in this pipeline, what do you look for? Whether it's an entrepreneur or whether it's a business, how do you, kind of measure out who's going to succeed or who is going to be the market leader for tomorrow?
No, that's a great question, Sandeep. And let me start off with how we identify opportunities. Um, there's been so much VC activity over the last 5 years. I mean, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of companies to look at. And our view was, first and foremost, we had to take a sector focused approach. So at Filter, we actually only spend time on 2 or 3 sectors. We look at IT services, we look at software, and we spend time on consumer, whether it's direct consumer brands or omni-channel retail. Maybe spend a little bit of time on fintech. We had to narrow down the funnel by first focusing on sectors we understood well, where we had deep investment expertise, network and relationships of advisors and entrepreneurs who can actually help us find promising opportunities. So step one is really having that point of view on where you're going to spend your time. Then the next step is to leverage that network to meet promising companies, perhaps even a year or two before they actually need your capital. Build relationships with them and track their performance over a period of time, so that when they are actually ready to raise capital, you have spent enough time with them to have conviction that you really want to do the deal with them. Then the next step, of course, is recognizing that you may have to participate in a somewhat competitive process, but because you've done your work beforehand, you're willing to lean in. And perhaps through doing some of that work, you've actually introduced an advisor to an entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur actually remembers that. They've said Filter Capital's added value. They're not even investors in our company yet. They remember that as well. So that when it comes time for the entrepreneur to choose who their capital providers will be, and the top entrepreneurs, as you know, will always be spoiled for choice, you actually have the ability to be a part of it.
Very interesting. One of the things that I keep hearing from a lot of entrepreneurs is that, the VCs and the PEs are very brutal when it comes to the survival of the fittest, right? You make investments with all due deliberation. You put in a lot of thought to make investments in a handful of companies, but then some of them follow the curve to growth, but the others are not necessarily as fast to pick up the growth curve. And one of the concerns that is always brought forward is that because of this philosophy of survival of the fittest, the attention of a GP goes into those 1 or 2 or 3 companies which are basically making that cut, and the rest of them kind of are kind of forgotten. Now, in your experience, how does that play out?
Actually, you have highlighted a very important difference between private equity and venture capital. Private equity model actually is all about doing a handful of deals, digging in deep, understanding the opportunity and the entrepreneur and long-term potential. And once you decide you want to do a deal, you invest as much capital as possible. Which means, in a fund, you might only have 8 to 10 companies. Which means every deal must work. Which means you're going to spend a lot of time with that entrepreneur helping them navigate the challenges of their business because you owe your investors an exit. You may not invest incremental capital if the company's not doing well, but you may spend a lot of your time and your networks and your energy delivering an exit work. Contrast that with the VC industry where the entire model is all about triage. And I think that's where some of the survival of this dynamics play out. Often VC funds will say, for every dollar we invest in the company, $2 will be follow-on. And so they're really reserving 2/3 of their fund for the winners, which means the rest of the companies may not necessarily, get that capital or that attention. And I think it's some of the nuances that entrepreneurs do pay attention to when they're choosing providers of capital is that, will I get the attention of the right people within the organization throughout the journey of my company? And I'm not going to paint brushes about, whether VC will do it or PE will do it, but some of these nuances are worth understanding.
It's a big difference. Thanks. That's a very insightful differentiation between the world of the venture capital and private equity. But we are nearly reaching the end of the episode for us. But before we do that, a lot of entrepreneurs had posed a question saying, what do the fund managers really look for in a company? More essentially, what do they look for in an entrepreneur? What kind of skills, what kind of strengths do you guys value a lot? So from a filter capital standpoint, right, are there any specific, broad parameters that you think either from a company standpoint or from an entrepreneur standpoint that you think will make a big difference?
We are growth investors, so we're very stage and so therefore companies come to us when they've already achieved progress along their own journey. The founding team is typically in place. They have a very clear product market fit. They have a statistically significant number of customers who will say, yes, I use this product or service. I get ROI for this product or service. I'm prepared to renew this product or service. There's clear differentiation relative to competition in that the company has identified its sandbox. And the businesses may not be break even, but the unit economics make sense, which means revenues minus cost of delivery minus cost of acquisition of customer broadly. And the companies are essentially using capital to scale their business and build go-to-market and eventually achieve profitability. And where we can help as investors is really helping them build, because they understand the product, they understand their end market, but turning an interesting startup that's hit an inflection point into a business that is listed is itself a journey. And that's how we as Filter Capital help entrepreneurs. I think that's somewhat different from, say, late-stage private equity, where often go-to-market is figured out, businesses are already profitable, and business really is going to scale to another level. And in venture capital, perhaps the market is identified, the product is there with one or two customers, but there's still a little bit of a journey to say, okay, have they really mitigated some of that mortality risk of venture? So we play that middle ground between venture and private equity for Filter Capital. And our entire skill set is to help these companies get to that level. Now, with respect to choice of entrepreneur, which is another question of yours, we look for entrepreneurs, I think, first and foremost, high integrity. Because when you're investing in private assets, it's not easy to exit. Right. So we do a lot of diligence up front to make sure that we feel comfortable in the quality and the integrity of the entrepreneur, whether it's reference checks, channel checks, former employees, customers who are with the entrepreneur, customers who have churned from the entrepreneur. What do you think of the entrepreneur and the team? Of course, understanding their industry, having that drive and ambition to build something big, having the ability to rally a team and build a management team, and also ability to think both big picture as well as diving into the details and being aware of everything that goes on in the organization. Those are some of the other key characteristics we look for in an entrepreneur. And lastly, if an entrepreneur has been through a journey themselves, actually that's quite valuable. Right. Because at building any business is a journey. There's no easy answer here. Right. And so entrepreneurs who have some of that perspective and maturity actually goes along.
Thanks. Super helpful. And I think we all know there is one rule that there is no rule in terms of picking up an entrepreneur. And we see entrepreneurs coming in from all walks of life in different shapes and forms. But I think it's a great way for at least somebody to think in terms of framework, right? What are the things that you guys value? With that, we are at the end of our episode today. Thank you everyone for being with us for this session. And Nitin, thanks again for taking precious time out for our session today.